Uh, I think we do have a really good brains trust here today. This is pretty good. We got some of the more intelligent people on the internet here tonight.
Well, yeah. Well, if you can get Mark and Tan together, man, you got like the dream team. To be honest, like these two, these two freaking are like they are minds.com.
Well, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's true. They deny it. They are really humble people,
Yeah, we don't look for much.
you know. But
We were talking about recovery from alcoholism a little bit today, Tan, and
Oh yeah.
I remember something that I'm going to bring him up because you're here now. G.K. Chesterton talked
Okay.
about alcohol, and of course he was a drinker, but I think not a drunk or an alcoholic. But he said he talked about what was it? He said something along the line of they talked about the problem of drink, and it's not the problem with the drink; it's the problem of the drinker. It's the person. And what was the suggestion? Don't drink if you feel you need to. Don't drink medicinally. Don't drink this or that. If you're going to have a drink, it should be when you're happy. And
Yeah. That makes sense.
yeah. But for some people, even one drink is too much. They just can't. They don't like it basically. And I think anyone that decides they're going to quit drinking for whatever reason, and we were talking about people being in different states. Some people it's just pathological. They drink to the point where they kill themselves, they harm themselves physically and all the people around them. But other people just feel like they just don't like to drink anymore. And you've got to. I think you've got to respect that approach too. But have you ever felt you've gone overboard with drinking? I don't even know if you do drink.
Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about, Otto.
Oh, okay. you have no experience with overdoing it.
I don't have a drinking problem.
I've seen you with the odd can or the odd glass.
Yeah, well, I just I have a bottle of beer on my hand on every Roundtable stream, but I don't have a drinking problem.
Well, that's good.
No, you got a run table.
That's what alcoholics say.
Yeah, it's not a problem.
I don't have a problem.
I didn't drop it.
I don't have a drinking problem. Drinking has a problem with me.
That's it. These are all of the wonderful little sayings we have.
I don't know too much about Chesterton's whatever research experiment on problem with drinking, but it sounds a lot like C.S. Lewis, The Problem of Pain, which is one of C.S. Lewis, one of his writing. It's about why we have suffering in the world. You can extrapolate it to why do we have drinking in this world?
Why do we have suffering in the world? Do you remember his thesis offhand?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's the whole core of Christianity as an alternative to Buddhism, where in Buddhism you try to get away from suffering, right? You try to avoid suffering, right?
Yeah, you want to.
Suffering is the cycle of the mortals, and if you break out of that cycle of reincarnation and suffering, you get to nirvana, and that's how you attain your enlightenment according to Buddhism. But in Christianity, the suffering is a part of this fallen world, and the point of having suffering is for us to actually go through it, not avoid it. To go. So that's why there's something called redemptive suffering in Christianity. So the suffering has meaning. It's not meaningless. And I think people, if you talk to people who has gone through suffering and not give up out of it, they come out on the other side completely enlightened person in the Buddhist sense. But they've learned something out of that journey, and it was meaningful, right?
You know, yeah. Go on.
I think that's the thesis of C.S. Lewis's problem of pain. Yeah.
Interesting. You know, I've had a similar discussion about the fact that when we go through suffering, very often it's a tool of growth, right?
Yeah.
We very often do grow through suffering.
Yeah.
But at the same time, one of the things that we learn as we go through suffering is that we don't want to suffer. And I would say that if we go through suffering and we come out the other end a stronger, better person, as you're talking about it with redemptive suffering, I think the process of, in Buddhism, it's not so much avoiding suffering as, the way I'd put it is, there is suffering, and much of it is, in fact, all of it ultimately is caused by us. There is always pain, and a pain is different. And I will be right there with you about redemptive pain, because yes, when we have to go through painful things, I live with arthritis. I have other friends of mine that live with much worse pains. And I even shocked my doctor. I remember once, like, you should be in a lot of pain. I am. You know, it's like about, I don't want painkillers or whatever. But from the Buddhist point, it's the suffering, at least for me, has to do with, like, if you hurt your foot, you have the pain of hurting your foot, but the suffering is when you sit there and go, oh, I've hurt my foot. If only it wasn't hurt, then I could have, run the race today. It has more to do with, like, sloppy thinking.
Okay.
Ultimately, Buddhism, and we talked about this before, I think Buddhism is really addressing a lot of stuff that you don't really think of as religious in the West. The Buddha doesn't really turn to a lot of what we would consider spiritual questions. I think his attitude was, go to your spiritual advisor for that. We're here talking about controlling our own minds and reducing the unnecessary suffering we're making for ourselves. And I would say that itself, it's kind of suffering to go through learning how to admit that you're the cause of a lot of your own suffering. And that itself is a kind of redemptive suffering, perhaps, because you're suffering through until you can understand how to stop hurting yourself. I was talking to Roger about this. With me, it's like I spent a lot of my life, walking through the woods. I use the metaphor of hitting my head against a tree, and I'll just hit my head against the tree, and then I'll hit my head for years, and then I'll suddenly wake up and say, oh, look, I'm hitting my head against a tree. That's really dumb. Then I'll hit my head against the tree for another year or two, and then I'll say, oh, maybe I should walk in a different direction, and I do, and then I usually walk into another tree. But it's so I see about, we've got the Passion of Christ, we've got the suffering servant. Suffering is an important part of that, but maybe it's the translation of the term. In Buddhism, it has little to do with pain, except yes, you've got to bear up under the pain, and I think that can be redemptive. But yeah, you're trying to escape from suffering, but you're escaping from the suffering that you're creating. So it's more like you being a more responsible person.
In Christianity, Otto, you also escape from it because you have the model that Jesus Christ suffered once and for all for you. You do not need to suffer. When you have something, give it to him and let him bear the suffering for you. Accept the forgiveness and start again. So there is the same idea in Christianity, just with the different mechanism for letting go.
That sounds like what I was listening to, that Dr. B video about the path of the mind and the path of the heart, because Buddhism is profoundly psychological. If it was invented today, I think it would be considered a school of philosophy or psychology.
Yes.
More than a religion. Of course, it is a religion, especially concerning, IRS tax exempt status. It's definitely a religion. We're not moving away from that anytime soon. But I have noticed that a lot of the questions it deals with and a lot of the answers. And Buddhism is very much having to do with mental processes, step by step, looking at it from the way we think about things as opposed to opening our hearts to something higher. The idea of someone else taking on our suffering is a beautiful thought, but we still have to translate that into removing the suffering from ourselves. You know, one can, what was the old, I remember somebody said, I pray with my lips, eventually I'll pray with my heart. You can say these things, but you're not necessarily going to feel it right away.
Yeah,
So.
there's also another saying, it's like, you fake it until you make it.
Yeah, in music, yeah.
Yeah. You just pretend like you know what you're doing, and eventually...
That was my first couple of years on stage. That was me. I was like, I'll just pretend play here. I kind of know what I'm doing. I'll turn down a little bit.
The whole nothing thing, it's salvation through knowledge.
Hey, V is here.
Hello, V.
You know?
You are here.
Sounds
We're
like your
all
throat
here.
got a lot better.
I'm a little better.
You sound a little stuffed up though, dude.
No, I'm just in a lot of pain.
Oh no, we were talking about redemptive suffering. You were just in time.
Oh,
The suffering will redeem you.
well, let's talk about suffering. Imagine having an earache, which somehow creates some dormant tooth pain somehow.
Oh,
That's with my usual chronic neck pain.
ooh. Is it your right ear?
Left ear, left
Oh,
tooth.
that's the opposite of my ear. Oh, I always get bad earaches in my right ear. You're a left ear guy. Interesting.
I have an injury with my shoulder, injury with my elbow. So
Oh,
nonstop lightning storm through my body for about solid 4 days, 5 days.
I wondered why you were so quiet. Wow.
Just to move an inch, it was just like I was looking like I had Tourette's, just arms just jerking.
Wow.
Voluntary movement, just because there's so much overload in my nerve endings. Yeah, it got pretty bad there for a second.
Wow. That sucks, man. I'm glad you're feeling better. I hope you're feeling better.
Did you take any painkiller medicine, or how do you cope with it?
Well, so the earache thing, combining with everything else, that's a wash. There's nothing I can do to cope with that. I can do all the drugs in the world. I can have all the massagers. I can do everything. It just overrides everything. So it's just I have to sit there and take it.
Did they give you fevers, or no?
Yeah.
Just pain.
In a condition to get up to go to the emergency room,
Wow.
like any movement. I was basically just laying in bed being self-electrocuted. Like,
I hate it when you're too sick to go to the doctor. That's bad.
Yeah. So, so I can't regulate my body temperature. Not to make this all about me, but so I can't regulate my body temperature because of vaccine injury and other things. So like I like the cold because I can't stand the heat. I can't do anything with the heat. Cold, I love. Throw me on ice. I'm happy. So, but I can't tell when it's too cold because of that. So things like getting an earache or sore throat, these things become my only telltale signs that I'm cold.
Wow.
So, I pretty much occupy. I stay in the basement. Huge basement.